Robert Christian Bose Hansen, popularly known as the Butcher Baker, was an American serial unaliver active in Anchorage, Alaska between 1972 and 1983. Hansen abducted, and unalived at least 17 women. Many of the women abducted were released by Hansen into the wilderness and then hunted with a Ruger Mini 14 and hunting knives. He was captured in 1983 and sentenced to 461 years imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He passed away in 2014 of natural causes at the age of 75. Robert Hansen was born in Estherville, Iowa, on the 15th of February 1939. He was the eldest of two children to an American mother, Edna Margaret Hansen, and Danish father and local baker, Christian Chris Hansen. Robert was employed at his father's bakery. The family moved to Richmond, California in 1942, but returned to Iowa in 1949 and settled in Pocahontas. In his youth, Hansen was said to have been shy with a stutter and suffered with severe acne which left permanent scarring. Throughout his childhood and adolescence, he was described as a quiet loner who had a difficult relationship with his domineering father. Hansen started to practice both hunting and archery, often finding refuge in those pastimes. In 1957, he enlisted in the United States Army Reserve and served for 1 year before being discharged. He later worked as an assistant drill instructor at a police academy in Pocahontas. There, he began a relationship with a younger woman whom he married in the middle of 1960. On the 7th of December 1960, Hansen was arrested for burning down a Pocahontas County, Iowa school bus garage as revenge for his unpopularity in high school. He served 20 months of a 3-year prison sentence in Anamosa State Penitentiary. During his incarceration, he was diagnosed with manic depression and periodic schizophrenic episodes. The psychiatrist who made the diagnosis noted that Hansen had an and was obsessed with getting back at people who he felt had wronged him. Hansen's wife filed for divorce after he was incarcerated. Over the next few years, Hansen was jailed several times for petty theft. In 1967, he moved to Anchorage, Alaska, with his second wife, whom he had married in 1963 and whom he had 2 children with. In Anchorage, he was said to have been well liked by his neighbours and set several local hunting records. In December 1971, Hansen was arrested twice. First for abducting and attempting to an unidentified housewife, then for arring an unidentified S-worker. He pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon in the former offence. The R charge involving the S-worker was dropped as part of a plea bargain. Hansen was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After serving 6 months of his sentence, he was placed on a work release programme and released to a halfway house. In 1976, Hansen pleaded guilty to larceny after he was caught stealing a chainsaw from an Anchorage Fred Meyer store. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and required to receive psychiatric treatment for his bipolar disorder. The Alaska Supreme Court reduced his sentence and he was released with time served. Hansen is believed to have started unaliving around 1972. His modus operandi is believed to have been to stalk a woman to learn her habits, eventually picking her up in his car and forcing her at gunpoint to his home, where he would her. He may then have taken the woman to a secluded area and hunted her as if she was wild game before shooting or stabbing her. Some of the women Hansen unalived were S-workers. Many were teenagers. It is believed by authorities that Hansen's first unaliving victim was 18-year-old Celia Van Zetten. Van Zetten was kidnapped on the 22nd of December 1971 and froze to unaliving in the wilderness after escaping from her abductor. Her body was discovered on the 25th of December. The abduction occurred 3 days after Hansen committed his assault on the S-worker for which he was imprisoned. While there are some similarities between Hansen's modus operandi and Van Zetten's abduction, there is no conclusive evidence linking him to the attack, and he himself denied involvement. On the 13th of June 1983, Hansen offered 17-year-old Cindy Paulson $200 to perform oral S. When she got in the car, he pulled out a gun and drove her to his home in Muldoon. There, he held her captive and proceeded to and torture her. She later told the police that after Hansen chained her by the neck to the post in his basement, he took a nap on a nearby couch. When he awoke, he put her in the car and took her to Murrell Field Airport, where he told her that he intended to a shack in the Knik River area of the Matsushika-Sustina Valley, accessible only by boat or bush plane. Paulson, crouched in the back seat of the car with her wrists cuffed in front of her, saw a chance to escape when Hanson was busy loading the cockpit of his airplane, a Piper PA-18 Super Cub. While Hanson's back was turned, Paulson crawled out of the back seat, opened the driver's side door and ran towards 6th Avenue. Paulson later told police that she had left her blue sneakers on the passenger side floor of the sedan's back seat as evidence that she'd been in Hanson's car. Hanson panicked and chased her, but Paulson reached 6th Avenue and managed to flag down a passing truck. The driver, Robert Yount, alarmed by Paulson's dishevelled appearance, stopped and picked her up. He drove her to the Mush Inn, where she jumped out of the truck and ran inside. While she pleaded with the clerk to phone her boyfriend at the Big Timber Motel, Yount continued to work, where he called the police to report the incident. When Anchorage Police Department officers arrived at the Mush Inn, they were told that Paulson had taken a cab to the Big Timber Motel. APD officers arrived there and found Paulson in room 110, still handcuffed and alone. She was then taken to APD headquarters, where she described her perpetrator. Hanson, when questioned by APD officers, denied Paulson's accusation, stating that she was trying to cause trouble for him because he would not pay her extortion demands. This excuse became one Hanson used on many other occasions, but although he had several prior run-ins with the law, Hanson's meek demeanour and humble occupation as a baker, along with his alibi from friend John Henning, persuaded police not to consider him as a serious suspect. Detective Glenn Foth of Alaska State Troopers had been part of a team investigating the discovery of several bodies in and around Anchorage, Seward, and the Matsushika-Sustina Valley area. The first of the bodies was found by construction workers near Eklunta Road. The body, dubbed Eklunta Annie by investigators, has never been identified. Later that year, the body of Joanna Messina was discovered in a gravel pit near Seward in 1982. The remains of a 23-year-old Sherry Moreau were discovered in a shallow grave near the Knik River. Floth believed that all three women had been unalived by the same perpetrator. Floth contacted FBI Special Agent John Douglas and requested him to help with an offender profile based on the three discovered bodies. Douglas thought the killer would be an experienced hunter with low self-esteem, have a history of being rejected by women, and would feel compelled to keep souvenirs of his unalivings, such as victims' jewellery. He also suggested that the assailant might stutter. Using this profile, Floth investigated possible suspects until he reached Hanson, who fit the profile and owned a plane. Supported by Paulson's testimony and Douglas's profile, Floth and the APD secured a warrant to search Hanson's plane, vehicles and home. On the 27th of October 1983, investigators uncovered jewellery belonging to some of the missing women, as well as an array of firearms in a corner hideaway of Hanson's attic, which included a 223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 semi-automatic rifle. Also found was an aeronautical chart with 37 little X marks on it, hidden behind Hanson's headboard. Many of these marks matched sites where the bodies were found. Others were discovered later at the locations marked on Hanson's murder map. When confronted with the evidence found in his home, Hanson denied it as long as he could, but he eventually began to blame the women and tried to justify his actions. Eventually confessing to each item of evidence as it was presented to him, he admitted to spree attacks against Alaskan women starting in 1971. Hanson's earliest victims were young girls or young women, usually between the ages of 16 and 19, not S-workers, unlike some of the victims who led to his discovery. Hanson is known to have had and assaulted over 30 Alaskan women, and to have unalived at least 17, ranging in the age from 16 to 41, although based on evidence, law enforcement suspect that Hanson unalived at least 21 female victims. The following is a list of Hanson's known victims and several other additional women who've been mentioned as possible victims. Of these 18 women, Hanson was only formally charged with the unalivings of 4: Sherry Moreau, Joanna Messina, Eklunta Annie, and Paula Golding. He was also charged with the kidnapping and of Cindy Paulson. Celia Beth Van Zetten, then 18 years old, was at home with 2 of her 3 older brothers on the 22nd of December 1971. 3 of them shared a house on Knik Avenue in South Anchorage, close to Northern Lights Boulevard, with their older brother and cousin. Her parents resided in a different house in Anchorage. In the late evening, Beth left her house and walked a few blocks to the nearby Bilo supermarket. The Bilo closed at 9 p.m. and she left at 8:30. Between 8:45 and 9 p.m, a witness spotted Beth go to the Bilo. At around 9 p.m, a neighbour claimed to have spotted her on Northern Lights Boulevard. She never reached the Bilo. Her disappearance was reported 2 days later. On the 25th of December 1971, her body was discovered at Chugach State Park, close to Anchorage. Her chest had been sliced with a knife and she had been bound and subjected to an SA. She had been dumped, still alive, into a deep ravine before passing away from exposure. According to forensic evidence, she attempted to climb back up the slope but was unable to due to her bindings. Hansen has been accused of unaliving her because of an X on his aircraft map, but he denied responsibility for both her unaliving and other women's homicides who were not involved in S-work. Megan Siobhan Emmerich, then 17, vanished on the 7th of July 1973 in Seward, Alaska. She was spotted leaving a dorm laundry room while attending the boarding school at Seward Skill Center. She has not been seen or heard from since. Megan left behind all of her personal items, including her ID. Before contacting the police, her roommate conducted a 3-day search for her. Hansen denied killing her to authorities, but he did admit that he's in Seward the day that Megan vanished. Due to an X on his aircraft in the Seward region, he's thought to be responsible. Apparently, Hansen admitted to a former inmate that he transported Megan to a cabin in the Seward region that was only reachable by boat, where he killed her and buried her. On the 5th of July 1975, Mary Kathleen Thale, aged 22, disappeared from Seward, Alaska. Her husband was away working on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, and she lived on Lower Point Road. She was driven into town by a friend who dropped her off at a local bakery. Between 1:30 and 2 p.m, a different acquaintance saw her by Waterfall on Lowell Point Road. She has not been seen or heard from since. Hansen acknowledged being on Seward on the day that Thurl vanished but denied killing her, but an X on his aviation chart in the vicinity of Resurrection Bay increased suspicions about him. Hansen admitted to killing her and discarding her body in Resurrection Bay, according to a former prisoner. The remains of Eklunta Annie was discovered buried next to a power line in the wooded area 1 mile south of South Ekluna Lake Road in Eklunta, Anchorage, Alaska on the 21st of July 1980. Hansen admitted to stabbing her in the back after she made an effort to flee from his car. She was either a topless dancer or a worker, according to Hansen, who also claimed that she was his first murder victim. Despite his claim that Annie might have come from Kodiak, Alaska, troopers think that she might have arrived in Alaska from California. Her body had already been largely consumed by wildlife when it was found in a shallow grave near Eklunta Lake Road. Local topless dancer 24-year-old Joanna Messina was out for dinner with Hansen on the 19th of May 1980 while she was working in Seward, Alaska. According to Hansen, before Messina offered him S in exchange for cash, everything was going smoothly. Hansen refused to pay and refused to release her, so he drove her and her dog to a distant place in the Snow River. He hit her with a .22 caliber revolver before shooting her twice and the dog once. He brought Messina's body to a gravel pit nearby and dumped gravel over her body. Her dog and Messina's belongings were thrown into the woods and the gun was thrown into the Snow River. On the 8th of July 1980, her severely decomposed body was found after it had been eviscerated by wildlife. On the 28th of June 1980, Roxanne Eastland, then 24 years old, vanished. She had been residing at the Budget Motel on Spurnard Road in Anchorage, Alaska, with a boyfriend for the previous 2 weeks. On that day, she was scheduled to meet an unnamed man downtown on 4th Avenue. She has not been seen or heard from since. Although Hansen admitted to killing her, her body was never found. At the nightclub she worked at in Anchorage, Lisa Futrell met and was subsequently kidnapped by Hansen on the 6th of September 1980. When she failed to return home following her 7th of September shift at the club, her 2 young housemates reported her missing. Her body was discovered on the 9th of May 1984, buried next to a gravel pit south of the former Nick Arm Bridge. Sherry Moreau, a 23-year-old topless dancer, told friends that she was meeting a photographer who had promised her $300 for nude images on the 17th of November 1981. She was never seen again. A shallow grave was discovered by hunters on the banks of the Nick River, which borders Anchorage, on the 12th of September 1982. Morrow, who was reported missing a year earlier, was identified from the remains. She had received 3 gunshot wounds in the back, and cartridges discovered close to the body revealed that a .223 Ruger Mini 14 hunting rifle had been used to deliver the shots. An odd feature, however, was that although the body was found fully clothed, there was no bullet holes in the clothing, suggesting that Sherry had been naked when shot and had been redressed after death before being buried. At 11 p.m. on the 2nd of December 1981, Andrea Mona Fish Alteri was last seen boarding a taxi to go to the Boniface Mall in Anchorage, Alaska. She intended to meet an unnamed male for a photo shoot and perform erotic dances, who she has not been seen or heard from since. When authorities searched Hansen's house, several of her possessions, including her fish necklace, were discovered. Hansen claimed that after he met her, he threatened her with a gun and abducted her, blindfolding and handcuffing her. Near the Nick Ann Bridge, they took a car to the service road off Palmer Highway. He unbound her there and abused her sexually. He killed her with a .22 Browning automatic pistol after she retaliated. He then stole her necklace, weighed a duffel bag with gravel, and tied it to her and threw her off the bridge into the Nick River. Her body was never found. Sue Luna, 23-year-old exotic dancer, voluntarily agreed to a $300 photo shoot offer with a nightclub patron. On the 26th of May 1982, she met Hansen in a diner parking lot in Anchorage, Alaska. The following day, Luna was reported missing. Hansen had abducted and killed her, then buried her in the Nick River. She was discovered on the 24th of April 1984. According to Hansen, he had her flee into the forest while hunting her like an animal while she was stripped, with no clothes on. Luna had been shot to death. The partial skeletal remains of Robin Pelkey, 19, was found on the 25th of April 1984 in Palmer, Alaska, close to Horseshoe Lake. It was determined that she had been stabbed and shot. It is unknown if she was involved in S-work. In October 2021, forensic genealogy was used to determine her identity, having been known by the moniker of Horseshoe Harriet before she was identified. Early in the 1980s, Perkley resided in Anchorage, Alaska, and she vanished on the 19th of July 1983. Delynn Sugar Renee Frey, a 22-year-old former resident of Anchorage, Alaska, was last seen sometime in March 1983, but was not immediately reported missing. She was abducted and killed by Hansen. She was buried as Jane Doe in Anchorage Cemetery after her body was discovered in a Nick River sandbar by a pilot trying out new tyres on the 20th of August 1985. It was not until 1989 that she was identified when an Alaska State Trooper recognized her jewelry in a case file photo. Paula Golding, 30, was a dancer in Anchorage when, on the 25th of April 1983, Hansen offered her money before kidnapping her. He drove her to his aircraft, and once they reached the remote spot, she fought with him and attempted to get away, according to Hansen. She fled, and he fired a .223 rifle at her, killing her. On the 2nd of September 1983, she was discovered on the Nick River, buried in a shallow grave. She had been wounded in the back, but because her clothing was damaged, it was possible that she was shot while not having any clothes on, and then clothed before being buried. Cindy Paulson, 17, met Hansen on the 13th of June 1983 in Anchorage. After agreeing to pay for S, Hansen pulled out a .357 Magnum on her and kidnapped her. She was taken to his home, bound and essayed before Hansen took her to Merrill Field where his aeroplane was. Hansen left Paulson alone in his car whilst he began loading his plane, threatening to kill her if she tried to run away. She ran away towards Fifth Avenue. There she was picked up by a passing driver, Robert Yount. Yount took Paulson to a safe location and shortly after called the police. About the same time, a security guard at the Merrill Field noticed some suspicious activity and, although he made no contact, he noted the license tag for Hansen's car. Police located and interviewed Paulson about the attack. On the 10th of July 1981, dancer Malai Larson, aged 28, was reported missing from Anchorage, Alaska. On the 24th of April 1984, her body was discovered in a parking lot close to the Nick Ann Bridge. Dancer Teresa Watson, 22, was last seen in Anchorage on the 25th of March 1983. She informed her roommate that she was meeting a man who would give her $300 in exchange for an hour or two of company. At Scenic Lake, Hansen abducted her and killed her. Hansen was unable to bury her since the earth in the region was still frozen. He abandoned her where she had died. She was discovered on the 26th of April 1984. 24-year-old Angela Lynn Federn was last seen on 4th Avenue in Anchorage sometime in February 1983. She was not reported missing until May. The owner of a nightclub reported Federn, one of his dancers, had gone missing. Hansen had kidnapped and murdered her. Verdon's body was found on the 26th of April 1984 on a small lake near the larger Figure 8 lake. 20-year-old Tamara Tammy Pedersen was a dancer at a nightclub in Anchorage. The last her family had heard from her was during a phone call on the 7th of August 1982 when she had claimed she'd been offered money to pose for photographs. She was kidnapped and murdered by Hansen. Her body was not found until Hansen confessed and pointed out its location on a map. On the 29th of April 1984, her body was recovered 1.5 miles from the Old Nick Bridge. Once arrested, Hansen was charged with assault, kidnapping, multiple weapons offences, theft and insurance fraud. The last charge was related to a claim he filed with an insurance company of the alleged theft of some trophies. He used the proceeds to purchase his plane. At trial, he claimed that he later recovered the trophies in his backyard but forgot to inform the insurer. Hansen entered into a plea bargain after ballistics tests returned a match between bullets found at the crime scenes and Hansen's rifle. He pleaded guilty to the 4 homicides the police had evidence for: Moreau, Messina, Golding and Eklunta Annie, and provided details about his other victims in return for serving his sentence in a federal prison, along with no publicity from the press. Another condition in the plea bargain was his participation in deciphering the markings on his aviation map and locating his victims' bodies. Hansen confirmed the police theory of how women were abducted, adding that he would sometimes let a potential victim go if she convinced him that she would not report it to the police. He indicated that he began killing in the early 1970s. Hansen showed investigators 17 grave sites in and around south central Alaska, 12 of which were unknown to investigators. There remain marks on his map where he refused to give up, including 3 in Resurrection Bay near Seward. Authorities suspect 2 of these marks were the graves of Mary Thill and Megan Emmerich, whom Hansen had denied killing. The remains of 12 of the probable 21 to 37 victims were exhumed by the police and returned to their families. Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He was first imprisoned at the United States Penitentiary, Lewisburg in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. In 1988, he was returned to Alaska and briefly incarcerated in the Lemon Creek Correctional Center in Juneau. He was also imprisoned at Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward until May 2014, where he was transported to the Anchorage Correctional Complex for health reasons. Hansen passed away on the 21st of August 2014, aged 75, at Alaska Regional Hospital in Anchorage due to natural causes related to lingering health conditions.